Plague drapes the city in grey. In Ashworth Hall, a widowed duke declares an engagement to a glittering beauty, while a betrayal he cannot bury burns like a brand. Whispers coil through corridors, candles shiver, a dangerous test takes shape. He will seek truth while pretending not to see. Between duty and desire stands Cecily, a humble maid tending a secret winter garden where hope refuses to die. One choice will protect a title, another will save a heart. And a secret is about to spark a scandal. Before we begin, tell us where you're listening from and what you love most about period romances. Slow burn longing, courtly intrigue, or love that defies class. London, in the year of our Lord 1592, lay cloaked beneath a shroud of ash-grey skies and restless dread. The plague, ever the silent phantom, stalked the alleys and marketplaces like a thief in the dark. The Queen's court pressed onward with powdered faces and painted smiles, but in the countryside, far from the music of lutes and the clamour of courtiers, Ashworth Hall stood like a monument to sorrow, stone, ivy, and silence. It was here that Duke Cedric Ashworth, once the lion of the royal court, now paced the corridors of his ancestral home like a ghost among the living. At 38 years of age, he carried the weight of grief with noble shoulders too weary to resist. His dark chestnut hair, now touched with threads of silver, framed a face carved by time and betrayal. The steel blue of his eyes had once turned hearts to water and enemies to dust. Now they reflected nothing but storm and restraint. He had buried his duchess nearly 1 year past. Whispers said she had died of fever. Others murmured that her death had been hastened by secrets Cedric had never spoken aloud, and though time might numb the wound, it had not cleansed it. What was once a home filled with laughter and firelight had become a mausoleum of velvet shadows and hollow footsteps. But on this particular morning, as crows cried from the frost-bitten trees and a weak sun filtered through the leaded windows of the great hall, the Duke summoned his steward and dictated with practiced calm, "Announce my engagement to Lady Aurelia Fenwick. Let the news reach London before dusk." The ink on the letter barely dried before tongues began to wag. Lady Aurelia Fenwick, 26, the daughter of Viscount Fenwick, cousin to Lord Danby, and a woman known for her beauty as much as her ambition. Her hair gleamed like polished gold. Her eyes were emeralds set in ice. She had never known hunger nor humility. She had danced in palaces, been courted by dukes and barons alike, and now, at last, had captured the most coveted title in England after the Queen's own hand, Duchess of Ashworth. The hall stirred. Servants bustled to prepare rooms long unused. Silks were aired, silver polished, candles trimmed. The hearths, cold for too long, were brought back to flame. But not all who moved through the hall wore silks or bore titles. Cecily Harland, a maid of 22, passed through the chaos with quiet eyes and purposeful steps. Her gown was plain wool, dyed a sober slate blue, laced over a linen smock. A white coif covered her dark chestnut curls, though a rebellious lock often slipped free to brush her cheek. She bore no jewels, but her gaze held the soft dignity of someone who had known loss and chosen to remain gentle. Few in the household remembered her story, for she never told it. But once, long ago, her father had owned a small bookshop on Fish Street. He had loved stories, ink, and the smell of pressed parchment. And Cecily had loved him. The shop had burned during a riot. The debts had followed like vultures. In time, she had become a maid at Ashworth Hall, not from disgrace but survival. And in the hours after her duties were complete, when no one watched and the lanterns flickered low, Cecily would retreat to a hidden patch of earth behind the servants' quarters. There, beyond the yew hedges, she had begun to plant. She had found a handful of seeds among the gardener's discarded pouch, a few sprigs of winter primrose, snowdrops and ivy, and began quietly, stubbornly, to cultivate a winter garden, a place where beauty might exist even when all else decayed. From his study window on the second floor, Cedric often saw her, not that he admitted it. A figure in the dusk, her hands buried in the soil, her breath curling into the air like prayer. He did not know her name, not yet, but he watched, and he wondered. That very evening, the great gates of Ashworth Hall swung open with a groan that echoed through the mist. A gilded carriage arrived, drawn by white stallions and guarded by liveried men on horseback. Within sat Lady Aurelia, adorned in a velvet cloak the color of wine and lined with ermine. Jewels glittered at her throat, her gloved hand poised as if sculpted. When she descended, her heel barely kissed the earth. The household lined the corridor. Cecily stood among the maids, head bowed. Aurelia's gaze swept over them as one might survey a collection of dull portraits in a dusty gallery. "Serviceable," the new lady murmured with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, Cedric stood before the fire, his cloak hanging heavy with the damp of the evening. His steward, Master Bellamy, brought the wine, but the Duke waved it away. "She will marry me," Cedric said, eyes locked on the flames, "but I must know what lies behind the mask." "My lord?" Bellamy blinked. "I will not be made a fool again," Cedric whispered. "From tomorrow on, I shall be blind." The steward stared. Cedric's jaw tightened. "Let her show me who she is when she believes I cannot see." And so it began. Ashworth Hall, long blind to joy, would now be ruled by feigned blindness and watched over unknowingly by eyes too often ignored. Eyes that planted snowdrops in secret gardens. Eyes that did not seek titles or jewels. Eyes that one day might see into the soul of a broken man more clearly than anyone ever had. But for now, Cecily returned to the garden, kneeling beside the frozen earth, unaware that the world she had quietly sustained would soon turn its gaze upon her. Not with cruelty, not with pity, but with the first flicker of something dangerously close to hope. The morning broke sullen and heavy with mist, as though the sky itself held its breath in anticipation of something unspeakable. A thick silence wrapped around Ashworth Hall, disturbed only by the caw of a solitary raven perched upon the east turret. Inside, servants moved in measured silence, their footsteps hushed on the stone floors, their eyes wide with unspoken questions. By the time the first bell tolled the hour of 8, news had already spread through the estate like fire on dry parchment. The Duke had taken ill. Not with fever or coughing fits, but something far more tragic. He had, overnight, lost his sight. The announcement, delivered by the steward with appropriate gravity, sent tremors through the great house. The kitchen fell silent. The scullery maids crossed themselves. The chamberlain whispered to the butler, and even the footman, so often unbothered by matters of the drawing-room, paused to mutter their suspicions in the corridor. No one dared question the news aloud, but in every hallway, every stairwell, the unspoken words echoed. Was it a curse or punishment? Upstairs in her newly appointed chambers, Lady Aurelia Fenwick stood before her mirror, holding a hairpin made of ivory and pearls between her slender fingers. She gazed at her reflection, her mouth curled faintly in disdain, her emerald eyes narrowed. Her golden hair gleamed in the morning light, styled to perfection. Yet the beauty that had once secured her place in Cedric Ashworth's life now flickered with uncertainty. "A blind duke," she murmured, adjusting her ruff collar. "How inconvenient." Her lady's maid, a silent girl with trembling hands, dared not respond. In the drawing-room below, Cedric Ashworth sat in the high-backed chair near the hearth, his hands resting on the carved arms, his gaze deliberately unfocused. He had dismissed the steward and refused breakfast. His sight, though perfectly intact, remained fixed on the vague middle distance, betraying no flicker of deceit. His mind was iron, his heart a storm. He had made his decision, and now he would live inside it. There had been no pleasure in lying, only necessity. If Aurelia's affections were genuine, she would remain. She would care. She would reveal, without vanity, who she was when stripped of public praise and polished mirrors. But if not, then truth would find him soon enough. And in the quiet that followed his announcement, one voice alone had stepped forward with gentle courage. "If it pleases your grace," she had said that morning, eyes lowered, "I can be of assistance. I know the house well, and I can read to you should you wish it." It had been Cecily Harland. He had not looked at her. He could not now. But the tone of her voice stayed with him, soft and steady as candlelight in the dark. Now, as the hours passed like drifting ash, Cecily returned to his side, a small book of poetry in her hands. "If your grace permits," she said again, her voice near the doorway. "Read," he said, not lifting his face. She obeyed without delay, moving to sit upon the cushioned bench by the window, her back straight, her hands firm. She opened the book and began to read in a voice that was neither meek nor overly trained, just honest. And Cedric listened, not to the words on the page, but to the rhythm of her breathing, the occasional hesitation before an unfamiliar phrase, the way she rolled certain vowels as though savoring them. Her voice was not meant for recitation before lords and ladies, but for small rooms and quiet hearts. It soothed something in him he had not known was raw. He remained silent long after she closed the book. "Is there more your grace would ask?" she said at last. He shook his head. "Not more. Only again." And so she read again. Meanwhile, Lady Aurelia did not trouble herself with the sick room. She sent notes to friends in the city requesting fine silks, new gowns, and rare perfumes. She entertained Lord Wensley, who arrived under the guise of offering condolences. She walked the halls with trailing sleeves and lifted chin, offering Cedric not concern, but shallow courtesies that left the air colder than before. "He hardly notices anything now," she said one evening to Lord Wensley as they paced the edge of the East Wing. "Blindness makes a man irrelevant. I shall do as I please." Lord Wensley smirked. "Then I am most pleased to be of your service." But not all eyes were blind. In the kitchens, Cecily's devotion became the subject of murmurs. How she brought the Duke his tea precisely as he liked it, though he had never told her. How she walked beside him with quiet confidence, guiding him with touches so gentle they could not be mistaken for boldness. How she seemed to see him, even when he claimed he could no longer see the world. And somewhere within the court, those murmurs travelled. It was a week after the announcement when Sir Edmund Treville, an old courtier with a fox-like smile and eyes sharp as razors, arrived at Ashworth Hall. He claimed to have come on behalf of the Queen, though no formal letter bore her seal. "You are missed at court," he told Cedric in the study. "Her Majesty inquires after your health." Cedric, seated in apparent blindness, gave a slow nod. "Tell her I live." Sir Edmund tilted his head, studying the Duke with faint amusement. "That much is clear, but word travels fast, your grace, even in silence." "What word?" Cedric asked, feigning detachment. Sir Edmund's grin deepened. "Of a certain maid, of her kindness, of her, how shall I put it, unintentional virtue. The Queen's ladies are curious. They say she reads aloud without stumbling, that she walks beside you, not behind, that she does not blush when spoken to." "She does not seek flattery," Cedric murmured. "Rare indeed," the courtier replied, "especially in a house where the future Duchess is more mirror than woman." Cedric turned his face slightly toward the window, saying nothing. Sir Edmund leaned in, his voice now low. "You are playing a dangerous game, Ashworth. You think yourself master of shadows, but shadows have ears. I suggest you end this theatre before the Queen begins to ask what you are really hiding." Then, with a bow too long to be sincere, Sir Edmund departed. That night, Cedric sat in the drawing room long after the candles had burned low. Cecily entered quietly, her arms full of firewood. "You should have called for a footman, my lady," he said, his voice cutting the silence. "I am no lady," she replied, kneeling by the hearth, "and I would rather carry warmth than wait for it." The simplicity of her words struck something in him. As she rose, brushing the soot from her apron, he spoke again. "You read well." She tilted her head, surprised. "My father taught me, when the shop was still ours. I used to copy verses on scraps of parchment and leave them under customers' books. Why? He asked. To give them something to find later. A small surprise. He was silent for a long moment. I should like to find something like that, he said softly. She looked at him then, truly looked, and something passed between them, fragile and wordless. Not desire, not yet, but a pull, like the first threads of light before dawn, weaving something delicate and dangerous between two souls who had no place to meet. She did not linger. She curtsied and left without a word, the scent of wood smoke trailing behind her. And Cedric remained in the dark, eyes open, heart stirred, no longer certain who was being tested and who was being seen. Ashworth Hall stood tall against the breathless grey of early winter, its stone arches and ivy-covered walls more sombre than ever. The days had shortened, and the sun rarely pierced the haze that cloaked the countryside. A dampness lingered in every corner of the estate, as if the house itself mourned something unspoken. Inside, however, the air simmered with something far less noble than grief. It began with laughter, not the warm, unguarded kind, but the brittle, echoing laughter of women trained in artifice. It floated from the southern wing, where Lady Aurelia had taken to hosting her circle of visiting companions. Other ladies of court, all perfume and silk, their conversation laced with hidden barbs. Cedric sat in the solar adjacent to the long gallery, his face turned slightly toward the window. He wore the role of a blind man, with such poise that no one dared question it. His stillness was complete, his expression carefully blank, his hands resting calmly in his lap, and so they believed him absent, or at least irrelevant. Lady Aurelia's voice rose above the others, lilting with false sweetness. I must say, being engaged to a duke who no longer sees does afford one a certain freedom. I needn't fret over whether my gown pleases him, or whether he notices if another man kisses my hand too long. The women gasped, then tittered behind their gloves. Cedric did not move. Poor man, she continued with theatrical pity. Once so fearsome, so admired, now diminished. I do try to bear it with grace. One of the ladies murmured, You are the picture of sacrifice, Aurelia. Cedric's hand clenched imperceptibly around the arm of the chair. He did not rise. He did not speak. But he listened, not just to the cruelty, but to the contempt masked in civility, the way a blade gleams beneath velvet. A moment later, the door to the solar creaked open. Cecily Harland stepped inside, carrying a tray of tea. Her eyes flicked toward the corner where Cedric sat, then dropped respectfully. She moved with practiced grace, setting the tray down upon the nearby table. I've brought chamomile, Your Grace, she said softly, with honey, for the headache. He nodded once. Thank you. She turned to go, but just as her hand reached the latch, the distant echoes of laughter drifted down the corridor again, sharper this time, unguarded. He spoke without turning his head. Tell me, Miss Harland, do they speak kindly of me? She froze, her fingers tightening against the wood. There was a long silence before she answered. They speak, often, she said. He arched a brow. That is not what I asked. Cecily drew in a slow breath. She did not lie. Some speak of you with admiration, others with jealousy, and a few, she hesitated, with ignorance. He turned his head slightly, pretending as though he could not see the way her hands twisted her apron. And you? He asked. She blinked. Me, Your Grace? Yes, you hear everything. What do you believe? Her reply came without hesitation. I believe grief changes a man, but does not ruin him. And I believe strength does not vanish because the eyes cease to see. Cedric said nothing, but a warmth, faint, unfamiliar, stirred in his chest. That evening a commotion broke out in the east wing. Footsteps thundered, voices clashed, and a vase shattered on the marble floor. By the time Cedric arrived, led by a reluctant footman who believed the charade, the younger scullery maid Lydia stood trembling before the housekeeper, her eyes red, her fingers stained with ink. A book, rare, bound in blue leather, lay open and defaced on the floor. Cedric recognized it instantly, a gift from a foreign scholar, left atop his desk. "Who did this?" the housekeeper demanded. "Speak, girl," Lydia sobbed. I didn't mean to." "She didn't," Cecily's voice rang out from behind the crowd. "I did." Every head turned. The older servants gasped. Cecily stepped forward calmly, though her pulse raced. Her gown was dusted with ash from the hearths. She looked neither apologetic nor proud, simply resolute. "I saw the book and was careless. I knocked the inkwell. I meant no harm." Lydia turned to her, confused and wide-eyed, but Cecily offered no explanation, only a small nod that stilled the girl's trembling. The housekeeper raised a hand to strike Cecily for her insolence, but Cedric's voice cut through the air like steel. "No!" He stepped forward slowly, cane in hand, his expression unreadable. "There will be no punishment," he said. "The matter is resolved." The housekeeper opened her mouth in protest, but the look he gave her silenced any reply. The corridor emptied in uneasy silence. Later that night, Cecily found herself in the library, quietly reshelving books by candlelight, the scent of wax and parchment mingling in the air. She did not hear Cedric enter, so light were his steps. He stood watching her from the threshold, his face cast in shadow, his eyes, for once, unveiled. "You lied," he said at last. She turned, startled. "Your Grace? You lied to protect her." Her throat tightened. She would have lost her post. Her mother is ill. I thought it the lesser harm." He stepped closer. "You risked your place for a girl who would not have done the same for you." She met his gaze, not knowing he could see her. "Perhaps, but I would not live with myself if I had not." There was a pause, long and heavy. "You are not what you appear, Miss Harland. Neither are you, Your Grace." He looked at her then, not as a nobleman appraising a servant, but as a man seeing something he had long forgotten, honor in its simplest form. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. The book was not ruined, only marked, but the courage was unmistakable. When he was gone, Cecily exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to her chest. Elsewhere in the hall, Lord Wensley arrived just past midnight, his boots clapping against the stones as he entered the great foyer with the arrogance of a man who had never known refusal. He was richly dressed in plum velvet, a golden chain around his throat, his eyes sharp with calculation. He embraced Cedric with exaggerated warmth. "My dear friend," he declared, "when I heard of your affliction, I rushed from London. How cruel life is to noble men." Cedric allowed himself to be embraced, masking the chill that passed through him. Wensley's gaze flicked to Aurelia, who stood at the landing above, her lips curved in a knowing smile. Their eyes met, for too long. Later, alone in his chambers, Cedric sat in silence. He had heard the mocking, seen the falseness, watched the schemes begin to weave around him like a web. But through all of it, one thread remained pure. A woman in a servant's dress who told the truth even when it hurt, who protected others without thought for herself. And for the first time in many months, the Duke of Ashworth whispered aloud to no one, "God help me. I see more now than I ever did before." The chandeliers had not been lit in months. Dust clung to the wax arms like memories long forgotten, and cobwebs curled in the corners of the great ballroom as though reluctant to let go of the silence that had taken root. But on this night, the hall shimmered. Dozens of candles flickered from silver sconces and mirrored walls, their flames dancing in uncertain rhythm. Gold-trimmed chairs were arranged in careful symmetry, and fresh greenery twined around the pillars, masking the cold breath of late autumn. Musicians tuned their instruments in hushed anticipation, and footmen in black and crimson stood like statues beside every entrance. The very air was perfumed with rose oil and apprehension. For the first time in over a year, Ashworth Hall had opened its doors to society. It was not a grand ball, no formal invitations had been sent to court, but rather a private gathering, an intimate affair, a show of life, of power, of continuity. It was Cedric Ashworth's declaration that he remained Duke, even in darkness. Lady Aurelia Fenwick had chosen her gown with cruel precision, emerald silk with gold embroidery across the bodice, a shade calculated to catch every flicker of candlelight. Her hair was styled in elaborate coils, pinned with mother-of-pearl combs, her ruff collar starched to perfection. She entered the ballroom as if descending onto a stage, her eyes scanning the room for admiration and finding it in no short supply. Guests bowed, women curtsied, the musicians struck a gentle chord, and the Duke did not rise. Cedric Ashworth stood in the far corner of the ballroom, not upon the dais, but beside a carved column, leaning subtly on his cane. He wore black velvet and a stiff collar, his cloak draped over one shoulder, his eyes cast in shadow. To the world he was blind, but every glance, every hesitation, every silence did not escape him. "Shall we begin?" Aurelia whispered with a brilliant smile, her voice directed toward him but loud enough for others to hear. "Would you care to dance, my lord?" Cedric inclined his head. "If you will lead me, Lady Aurelia." The room hushed. Aurelia blinked. "Dance?" she echoed, her voice thinning. "I may not see," he said calmly, "but I can still move. I recall the steps." Laughter trickled uncomfortably from one of the guests, then quickly died. Aurelia hesitated. "To dance before so many," she murmured, her smile faltering, "you would be guided poorly, and I fear I might lead us into embarrassment." Her hand did not extend. Her feet did not shift. She stood rooted in place, surrounded by flickering light and admiration. She would not risk for pity. Cedric inclined his head again, as though her refusal had no consequence. The musicians began to play. A low, melancholic melody filled the hall. Several couples took to the floor, spinning in practiced harmony. The silence around the Duke deepened, and he made no move to leave the shadows. And then a soft voice cut the quiet. "If your grace still wishes to dance." All heads turned. Cecily Harland stood at the edge of the room, her brown eyes wide but steady. She wore a simple gown of deep grey blue, her apron removed, her coif exchanged for a modest braid. She held no jewelry, no fan, no favor, only dignity. The room gasped, low and scandalized. Cedric turned his face toward her voice, and though he had not summoned her, his heart moved before his lips did. "I do," he said softly. She stepped forward without waiting for approval. The crowd parted like sea before a whisper. Cecily reached his side, her hand hovering for permission. He found it, his fingers brushing hers. And so, under the scrutiny of a dozen noble eyes and the blazing warmth of 100 candles, the blind Duke and the Maid began to dance. The music slowed to a stately rhythm. Cedric moved with practiced ease, guided not by sight but by the firmness of Cecily's hand at his shoulder, the softness of her palm in his own. Her breath was steady, her touch feather-light. She never pushed, only responded, her instincts sharp as if she'd danced in silence her entire life. There were no words, but in every step, every turn, something unspoken surged between them. A current of awareness, deeper than logic, more dangerous than protocol. It lived in the closeness of their bodies, in the pause between movements, in the air that trembled when he turned his face toward hers, and their breath met between inches. She did not falter, he did not let go. When the music ended, no one applauded, not because they were unmoved, but because they had forgotten to breathe. Cecily stepped back with grace, her eyes lowered. Cedric's expression revealed nothing, but his fingers lingered on the air where hers had been. Aurelia's voice broke the silence, brittle and cold. "Well, that was novel." The moment shattered. Guests looked away. The music resumed with cautious notes. Cecily returned to her place near the corridor. She did not look back, but Aurelia did. Later that night, after the guests had been ushered into carriages and the musicians dismissed, Cecily walked alone through the shadowed corridor toward the servants' quarters. The wax from her candle dripped onto the floor, and the flame flickered with each sigh of wind that crept through the cracks of the old stone walls. She had not made it 10 steps past the gallery when a hand gripped her arm. Lady Aurelia stood in the darkness, her eyes glittering with fury. "What you did tonight," she hissed, "was unforgivable." Cecily did not pull away. His Grace wished to dance. "You think that gives you permission to touch him in front of everyone?" Cecily held her gaze. "He is a man, not a relic." Aurelia's lip curled. "You overreach, girl. This house may tolerate your presence, but I will not suffer insolence. He is mine." "Then why would you not dance with him?" Cecily asked, her voice calm. "Why let him stand alone?" Aurelia's hand raised, but did not strike. Instead, her voice turned cold and low. "If I ever see you near him again, if you dare touch what isn't yours, I will have you dismissed by morning." Cecily's breath caught, not in fear, but in the weight of the truth she could not speak aloud. She nodded once, stepped back, and vanished into the shadows. But Cedric, from the far end of the hall, where he had lingered longer than he should have, had heard every word. And in the silence that followed, his heart ached, not with confusion, not with guilt, but with clarity. For the first time since grief had made him blind, Cedric Ashworth realized what he truly feared. Not darkness, but the cost of seeing. The winds that swept across the moors in the early hours of that morning were sharp, as if the earth itself had tired of silence and longed to stir the sleeping. Ashworth Hall, with its ancient stones and quiet grandeur, groaned under the weight of the coming storm. Windows trembled in their frames, chimneys whispered with restless gusts, and the trees beyond the eastern lawn bent as if bowing to some unseen sorrow. Inside the manor, the fire in the Duke's private chamber had burned low. The coals hissed in protest, reluctant to surrender their warmth to the cold that crept across the floor. A damp cloth lay forgotten on the side table. The Duke's breath, slow and uneven, betrayed the heat pulsing in his veins. The fever had returned. Cecily Harland stood at the threshold, a tray in her hands. Upon it, a porcelain cup of tea steeped in chamomile and linden flower, lightly sweetened with honey from the estate's last surviving hives. She had brewed it herself, not because it was her duty, but because something deeper compelled her. He had not asked for her. He never did. But in the quiet crackle of illness, it was her name his voice had reached for in his sleep. She stepped inside without being summoned. The room smelled faintly of lavender water and ink. His writing desk sat askew, papers scattered across it in disarray. A quill had dried mid-word. On the hearthrug, one of his books had fallen, its spine cracked, its pages open to a verse she recognized from memory. The Duke lay back against a stack of pillows, his eyes half closed, his skin pale, save for the flush of fever high on his cheeks. A fine sheen of sweat clung to his brow, and his hand, resting atop the coverlet, twitched now and again, as if chasing dreams he could not recall. Cecily approached, her footfalls nearly soundless. She placed the tray on the small table beside the bed, then reached for the cloth and dipped it into the basin of cool water. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the aching tenderness that bloomed in her chest whenever she saw him like this. So powerful, yet so fragile. So guarded, yet so exposed. She pressed the cloth gently to his brow. His lips parted with a faint breath. "Cecily." She froze. "Not Miss Harland. Cecily." "I'm here, Your Grace," she said softly. His eyes fluttered open, though he kept to the illusion of blindness. She knew now that he could see her, but she played the part as silently as he did. There were truths that danced between them, unspoken yet vivid like ink before it meets parchment. "You came," he murmured. "I brought you tea and honey from the northern hives," she added gently. "The bees still remember summer." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You speak like a poet." "My father did," she said, settling into the chair beside him. He kept a shop off Fish Street Hill. Books in every language, or so he claimed. Ink stained his hands more deeply than any glove could hide. Cedric turned his head slightly toward her voice. What happened to him? She hesitated, but then lifted her chin. The riots. One spring they came with fire and shouted that knowledge was poison. His books fed the flames that night. He died 6 days later, not from burns, from heartbreak. Silence lingered in the room, not heavy, but sacred. "I'm sorry," Cedric said. She gave a small nod, her gaze drifting to the fire. "He used to say words were like honey. They could sting, or they could heal, depending on how you tasted them." Cedric's eyes searched the ceiling, though they saw more than he let on. "I've lived among words most of my life," he said. "Speeches, orders, titles. I don't think any ever healed me." She turned to him then fully, her voice a whisper. "That's because none of them were meant for your wounds." The air between them thickened, not with desire, but with a grief too old to name, a yearning too young to trust, the kind of ache that begins in silence and ends in revelation, if only one dares to speak. He reached for the cup. She guided it to his hand. Their fingers brushed. He drank. "Honey," he said, surprised, "and warmth. You gave me both." A soft smile curved her lips. "That is all I have to give." He set the cup down and let his head fall back. "And yet it is more than I have been offered in months." Cecily stood slowly. Her duties were not complete, and the household would question her absence. But something in her heart anchored her to this room. "May I read to you?" she asked. He nodded. She stepped to the fallen book on the rug and lifted it gently. The leather was worn, the spine tender. She cradled it as one might a child, brushing away the dust. Her fingers flipped through the pages until she found the verse that had caught her eye. She began to read, "And I, who walked through golden halls and knew no peace, found it not in grandeur, nor in voices loud, but in the quiet warmth of gentle speech, and in the eyes of one among the crowd." He listened, eyes closed now, not in illness, but in reflection. "That line," he murmured, "I have read it before, years ago." She closed the book. Sometimes words return when we're ready to understand them. He looked at her fully now, no more pretense, no more blindness. Their eyes met, his like thunderclouds softened by rain, hers like warm earth ready for planting. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Neither are you," she replied, her voice barely above breath. Then, as if the moment could bear no more weight, she stepped away. Outside his chamber, the corridor echoed with approaching footsteps and hushed laughter. Aurelia's voice rang out like silver sharpened into steel. "I heard Lord Wensley arrived with roses this morning," she trilled. Such devotion must not be ignored. Cecily's heart clenched, though she did not understand why. From the shadows beyond the staircase, Lord Wensley's silhouette lingered, his posture too relaxed, his smile too self-assured. Aurelia leaned in close, her hand grazing his sleeve. Her laughter drifted through the hall like smoke, sweet, thick, suffocating. Cedric heard it too. He said nothing, but when Cecily closed the door behind her and the chamber returned to firelight and silence, the scent of ink and honey still lingered, and somewhere, beneath layers of pride and sorrow, something had shifted. Not a confession, not a promise, but a beginning, as fragile and dangerous as a poem whispered in the dark. The gardens of Ashworth Hall lay bathed in the silver haze of late afternoon. A pale sun hung low behind a curtain of autumn mist, its light trembling against the rust-colored leaves that clung to their branches in quiet defiance of the coming cold. The air smelled of damp earth and fading roses, as though the very ground mourned the decay of beauty too proud to yield. The garden maze, once beloved by the late Duchess, had fallen into a gentle disarray. Hedges no longer trimmed to military precision curved with a softness now, as if nature had reclaimed what grief had forgotten. And it was there, among winding paths and shadowed arches, that truth would reveal itself not in words, but in the brutal clarity of sight. Cedric Ashworth had walked the maze alone, his hand brushing against the boxwood hedges for guidance he did not need. He had dismissed his valet. He had not worn the dark lenses his steward had prepared for him. Today his eyes were unhidden. He had chosen, for reasons he could not yet name, to see, and what he saw carved into his soul like fire upon parchment. Beneath the arch of the old rose trellis, hidden from the house but not from the maze's heart, Lady Aurelia stood in Lord Wensley's arms, her hand pressed against his chest, her mouth grazing his as if sealing a vow no one else could hear. Cedric stopped, just beyond the ivy wall. His breath caught in his throat. The cold seeped into his gloves. He made no sound. Wensley's voice reached him, low and arrogant. "If you play your game well, darling, the title will be yours by winter, and with it, the land, the fortune." Aurelia's laugh tinkled like bells dipped in poison. "I am not the one playing blind, my love." She kissed him again, this time without pretense. Cedric turned away, not because he could no longer bear the sight, but because his soul had turned to ice. He had given Aurelia the benefit of doubt. He had hoped against reason that somewhere within her beauty lay substance. But what he had just witnessed was not disappointment, it was betrayal. Again. His footsteps crunched through the gravel path, faster now. He moved without direction, only instinct. Past the stone fountain, past the withered lilies, through the orchard gate, and into the stillness of the northern court, where the autumn wind clawed at the windows and rattled the panes like sorrow denied. He reached the far cloister and leaned against the cold stone pillar, pressing the heel of his palm to his brow. The veil of blindness he had crafted to protect his heart now felt like a noose. He did not hear Cecily until her voice pierced the silence like a thread of light in a shrouded chapel. "Your Grace?" He stiffened, eyes closed. She approached with measured steps, hesitant yet drawn by something she could not resist. In her arms, a folded blanket and a worn volume of verse. She had come to read, as she often did at that hour, expecting to find him in his study. Instead, she found him shaken. "Are you unwell?" she asked gently, coming to his side. He did not answer at first. Her hand hovered near his sleeve, then withdrew. Her fingers trembled around the book's spine. "I can return later, if you prefer to be alone." "No," he said hoarsely. "Stay." The word fell from his lips with weight, almost a plea. Cecily hesitated only a second before settling onto the stone bench beside him. She did not press him with questions. She simply opened the book and began to read, her voice steady and soft, like rain falling on forgotten earth. He listened, not to the poem, but to the grace in her voice, the sincerity in her pauses, the way her every word seemed to offer him a place to rest. When she finished, she closed the book and turned her face toward him, uncertain. "You are not fevered," she said carefully, "but you look as though you've been wounded." He inhaled sharply, as if the air itself resisted entering his lungs. "I was." Her eyes searched his profile, elegant, stoic, and yet barely holding together. "You do not need to say more," she whispered. "But I want to," he confessed. There was a long silence between them. She folded her hands in her lap, her shoulders rising with the chill, but she did not look away. "I trusted someone," he said at last, "and I saw them for what they truly are." She did not speak, only watched the struggle in his eyes. "I have been betrayed before," he continued, "by those who smiled with perfect grace and spoke with silken words. I told myself I would never be fooled again. I built walls. I hid behind darkness, thinking I might uncover truth by seeing nothing." He turned to her now, truly turned, and for a moment all the masks dropped. But truth does not live in what is hidden. It lives in what is quietly given, without expectation. Cecily's breath caught. She wanted to speak, but her voice failed her. He reached into the pocket of his coat and withdrew a small envelope, folded in pale parchment and sealed with blue wax. "I found this beneath my ledger days ago," he said. "No name, only words that stayed with me longer than I expected." She knew what it was before her fingers touched the wax. Her heart raced. "I returned it," he said, "not because I wish it gone, but because I wish you to know that I saw it, and that I read it. Every line." He gestured to the seal. "There's something inside." She broke the seal with trembling hands and opened the fold. Inside was her poem, carefully recopied in elegant script. "Where silence grows, I plant a seed. Not for the world, but for the need of something true, untouched by pride. A garden where the heart may hide." Pressed between the final fold was a single dried blossom, a snowdrop from her winter garden, preserved with reverence. Her eyes stung. "Why?" she asked, her voice tight with emotion. "Because it mattered," he said. They sat in stillness once more, the stone cold beneath them, the wind weaving through the cloister like a quiet benediction. He wanted to say more. He wanted to tell her everything about his deception, his blindness, the truths he had buried beneath duty and sorrow. But just as his lips parted, a noise echoed through the far corridor, footsteps hurried and loud. It broke the spell. Cecily rose, tucking the folded parchment to her chest, her composure carefully gathered. "I should return to my duties," she said, her voice calm. He stood, not to stop her, but to honor her. As she turned to leave, she paused. "Your Grace," she said without looking back, "gardens can bloom even in the coldest season, if someone tends them." Then she was gone. And Cedric stood beneath the arch of stone and sky, holding the silence like a wound he could no longer pretend not to feel. The wind swept across the moors with a fury that morning, bending the grass and rattling the bare limbs of the trees like bones in mourning. The sky above Ashworth Hall was a pale and bruised canvas, the color of secrets unspoken. Within the estate, the air was thick with preparation. Servants hurried with polished silver and floral arrangements. Footmen hauled crates of wine from the cellars, and the great hall was transformed into a golden spectacle fit for royalty. A banquet had been announced, not by the Duke, but by Lady Aurelia Fenwick, who had declared it essential that the engagement be properly acknowledged before the season's end. "The Duke must not appear weak," she told the steward. Her voice dipped in saccharine concern. "His people must be reminded that Ashworth still commands reverence, and a future duchess." No one dared question her authority, though many exchanged wary glances behind her back. The invitation was issued not to court, but to the surrounding gentry and influential families, a curated guest list designed not for celebration, but for display. A spectacle cloaked in civility, meant to bind Cedric Ashworth to a promise he had never fully made. And beneath it all, rumors churned like embers waiting for flame. In the kitchens, in the scullery, in the quiet corners of the estate where servants whispered between duties, one name surfaced with increasing boldness: Cecily Harland. "She's always near him. I heard he calls her by name. They say she walks with him in the gardens. She forgets her place." The words spread like smoke through linen folds and polished corridors, not shouted, not confirmed, but enough to stain, and enough to reach the ears of the one woman most determined to keep her position secure, Lady Aurelia. That afternoon, while Cedric remained in his study, eyes once again shielded by darkened glass, the illusion of blindness resumed. Aurelia summoned the housekeeper, Mrs. Davins, to her chambers. The door closed behind them. "I am not here to question your authority," Aurelia began, reclining in a chair draped in plum silk. "I merely wish to preserve the dignity of this household." The housekeeper nodded, her face stern. "There is a maid," Aurelia continued, smoothing a glove over her palm. "Cecily Harland, sweet-faced, humble, unassuming, but I fear foolish." "I've heard whispers, milady," Mrs. Davins replied cautiously. Aurelia leaned forward, her voice dropping like velvet over thorns. "She believes herself favored. I've seen the way she looks at his grace. It's unbecoming. And the staff, well, they notice. And if they notice, then soon, so will the guests." Mrs. Davins stiffened. "What would you have me do?" "Remind her," Aurelia said, standing now, her emerald earrings catching the sunlight, "that she is no more than her apron, no more than the dirt beneath our feet. And if she must be corrected, then let it be where all may see." That evening, as preparations for the banquet continued, Cecily was summoned to the servants' hall. She arrived with flour still clinging to her sleeves, her cheeks flushed from the kitchen's heat. Mrs. Davin stood waiting, arms crossed. "You've grown too proud, Miss Harland," the woman spat without preamble. "Too visible. The Duke's favor may blind others, but not me." Cecily blinked, confused. I don't understand." "Oh, you understand very well. Taking liberties. Seeking his attention like a cat at table. And now, guests speak your name as if you belonged in the gallery and not the servants' wing." "That isn't true," Cecily whispered, her voice shaking. "I've done nothing improper." But Mrs. Davins had already called in 2 scullery maids and a footman. "Let this be an example," she said. And in front of them, she stripped Cecily of her apron and announced her duties would be reduced to chamber pot cleaning and ash removal until further notice. "Perhaps then you'll remember what you are," she said coldly. Cecily stood frozen, her face pale. She did not cry. She did not plead. She simply lowered her gaze and turned away, carrying the shame not in her hands, but in her heart. Later, alone in the linen closet, her back pressed to the door, she allowed the tears to fall. Not for the punishment, but for the silence of the man who had once made her feel seen. For Cedric had said nothing. He had not stopped it. He had not even asked. And though she told herself he could not have known, that he was blind before all others, a wound had begun to open, deep and slow, in the quiet place where hope had once taken root. Meanwhile, Cedric sat in his study, unaware of the punishment's full cruelty, but keenly aware that something had shifted in the house. The halls felt colder, the air more tense, and Cecily had not come. Not that morning, not that afternoon, not with tea, not with poems, not with the scent of honey or quiet compassion. He waited, he paced, he asked the steward to check the kitchen, the maid's wing, her garden, but she was nowhere. Aurelia arrived instead, as if summoned by fate. "My love," she said sweetly, "shall we speak of the banquet?" Cedric turned toward her voice, his expression carefully blank. "What banquet?" She laughed, brushing non-existent dust from her skirts. "The one you will host tomorrow, of course. It has all been arranged. The Lord of Ashworth must not hide forever." "I see," he said coldly. She stepped closer. "You will announce our engagement before witnesses." There was a pause. "You assume much," he said. "I assume nothing," she replied, her tone sharpening. "I secure what is mine." He said nothing, and so she smiled, believing silence meant consent. But long after she left, Cedric remained alone in the study, the fire burning low, the shadows reaching higher along the panelled walls. He retrieved the folded parchment from the drawer, the poem Cecily had once written. He read it again by the light of the dying flame, not aloud, not with ceremony, just with longing. And in that moment, surrounded by silence and gold and ash, he felt the first stirrings of guilt take root, not for the lies he had told the world, but for the truth he had withheld from the one soul who had never asked anything from him but honesty. Outside, the wind howled, and in the darkness, the embers of pride began to die. The evening arrived draped in splendor, as if the heavens themselves wished to disguise the storm they sensed brewing. Ashworth Hall had not looked so resplendent in years. Golden candelabras illuminated the great chamber with a warm, flickering brilliance. Tables of polished walnut were adorned with crystal glasses and china edged in cobalt and gold. Strings of pearls draped across floral arrangements of autumn roses, and the scent of roasted game and mulled wine filled the air like perfume, sweet, heavy, and almost suffocating. The gentry of the county had arrived in carriages adorned with family crests, their horses glistening under the torchlight. Women emerged in gowns of silk and brocade, their jewels catching the light like tiny suns. Men in tailored coats and starched collars exchanged bows and pleasantries, their eyes quick to assess the mood of the gathering. They had come expecting a celebration. They had come prepared to witness the official announcement of Duke Cedric Ashworth's engagement to Lady Aurelia Fenwick. Whispers had already preceded them, of her beauty, of his tragedy, and of a banquet meant to silence all doubt. And yet, beneath the surface glitter, something was amiss. Cedric stood at the far end of the hall, dressed in black velvet, a silver chain clasped across his chest. He wore no spectacles tonight, no darkened lenses. His expression was unreadable, his presence commanding despite the silence he maintained. To all appearances, he was still blind, still dignified, still a noble figure bound by fate and necessity. Lady Aurelia floated beside him like a living portrait. Her gown was crimson silk, embroidered with tiny garnets that sparkled like embers. Her hair was braided into an intricate crown, and around her neck she wore a ruby choker, a gift she had ordered herself in Cedric's name. She was radiant, and she knew it. She smiled at every guest, laughed at every toast, and whispered promises into the ears of those she intended to keep close once she became Duchess. Her fingers grazed Cedric's arm possessively, her voice ringing loud and clear whenever she addressed him. "My future husband," she said more than once, "my beloved Duke." And Cedric allowed it. He stood beside her, silent and still, letting her voice shape the illusion, letting her bask in the final glow of borrowed light. But his eyes were watching everything. From across the hall, Cecily Harland stood at the edge of the servants' line, half-shadowed by the carved columns. Her hands were folded, her posture composed, her eyes downcast. She wore her plainest uniform tonight, as instructed. No coif, no ribbon, just her station and her silence. She had not spoken to Cedric in days, not since the punishment, not since the shift in the house's gaze had made her presence feel like an offense. And though she had not been dismissed, her world had narrowed, her duties reduced, her name whispered with scorn behind closed doors. Still she had come, because she had to see, because something in her heart refused to let go without knowing what would be spoken tonight beneath all the candlelight and deceit. She lifted her eyes just once, and met his gaze. The breath caught in her chest. He was looking at her, not blindly, not vaguely, but with certainty, with recognition, with purpose. Her heart stammered, but then the moment passed. He turned his face back to the room, and Lady Aurelia, emboldened by the attention of the guests, rose from her seat with a crystal goblet in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice rich with theatrical charm, "we are gathered this evening to honor not only the legacy of Ashworth, but its future. For I have the privilege, the joy of standing beside the man who will soon be my husband." A murmur ran through the crowd. Cecily's stomach twisted. Cedric remained seated. Aurelia stepped forward, her goblet raised high. "I ask you all to join me in toasting the official announcement of our engagement." She turned to Cedric, smiling triumphantly. "My lord!" The room fell into stillness, glasses lifted halfway. No one wished to toast before the Duke spoke. Cedric rose, slowly, deliberately. The scrape of his chair echoed across the hall like thunder. He stood tall, no longer leaning on his cane, no longer bowed by grief or performance. "I thank you all," he said, his voice deep and measured, "for honoring my home with your presence this evening." Aurelia beamed, already raising her goblet higher. "But," he continued, turning slightly toward her, "I must make something very clear before this toast proceeds." The room held its breath. "I am not engaged," he said. Gasps rippled like wind across a wheat field. Aurelia blinked, her smile frozen. "My lord, what are you—" "I am not blind," he said. Silence fell so thick it could have shattered glass. "I never was." Shock passed like lightning across the room. Hands flew to mouths. Chairs scraped back. Lord Wensley, standing near the sideboard, dropped his goblet in stunned disbelief. Cedric turned his full gaze to Aurelia, and his eyes, those clear, intelligent, unforgiving eyes, met hers with devastating precision. "I feigned blindness," he said, "because I had been deceived before. I wished to see, without being seen, and in doing so, I uncovered the truth." He looked toward Lord Wensley. "Your deceit was clumsy," he said coolly. "Your meetings in the gardens, your stolen kisses beneath the trellis, your ambition masked as gallantry." Wensley went pale. "And you," Cedric said, turning once more to Aurelia, "played your part with skill, but not well enough. You coveted a title, not a man." Aurelia's mouth opened, but no words came. "You used my name, my silence, and my grief for your own rise. But I see you now, and I will not carry this lie one moment longer." He stepped back. "You will leave Ashworth Hall tonight. You will take nothing that was not yours to begin with, and you will not speak my name again." Gasps became murmurs. Nobles turned their eyes away, some in scandal, others in awe. Aurelia stood frozen, her face drained of color, her hands trembling at her sides. She tried to step forward, but no one moved to help her. She turned in desperation toward Wensley, but he had already slipped away, alone, exposed, shattered. She fled the hall, the train of her crimson gown dragging behind her like blood. Cedric remained motionless for a moment, the firelight casting gold across his face. Then his eyes searched the edge of the room. Cecily was gone. He moved quickly now through the murmuring crowd, ignoring the questions, the startled faces, the bows. He pushed open the side door and stepped into the corridor. Empty. Only the sound of hurried footsteps somewhere beyond. Only the faint scent of lavender soap. Only the echo of a heart that had trusted and broken. Cecily had fled, not because she was angry, but because she was hurt, because she had been part of a deception without knowing, because even truth, when revealed too late, can feel like a betrayal. And as Cedric stood alone in the quiet corridor, the applause that might have followed his revelation now seemed distant and meaningless. He had exposed the liars. He had shattered the illusion. But he had also lost the one person who had never worn a mask, and that, he feared, might be the cost of truth. Snow had fallen lightly in the night, a quiet blessing from the sky that covered Ashworth Hall in a veil of white lace. The dawn light cast a silver glow across the frost-bitten grounds, transforming every branch and stone into something soft and solemn. Inside the manor, the air still buzzed with the aftermath of the banquet. The whispers, the scandal, the shock of a man who had pretended to be blind and had unmasked not only his fiancée, but the court itself. But the man in question had no interest in basking in triumph. He moved quickly now, almost frantic, down the eastern corridor and out through the service door where the sun had not yet melted the ice on the stone path. His cloak flared behind him like a dark wing, and his boots crunched over the brittle grass as he passed the stables, the frost-covered hedge maze, and the ancient elm tree that marked the edge of the main estate. He was searching, not for redemption, not for forgiveness, only for her, Cecily. The name echoed in his mind like a prayer. He had said it once, softly, too softly, and she had already turned away. She had fled into the shadows before he could offer her truth in place of the deception he had worn for too long. She had vanished like the mist after sunrise, and now his only compass was memory. It was then, turning past the broken stone wall near the servants' quarters, that he remembered the garden, the secret winter garden, a place few knew existed. A sliver of earth hidden behind the orchard, where ivy curled through broken trellises and stubborn violets bloomed even in snow. He had once glimpsed her there through the frost-glazed window of his study, kneeling in the dirt beneath the moonlight, fingers stained with soil, eyes alight with some unspoken reverence. He turned toward it now, half running, breath rising in clouds before him. His heart pounded, not with fear of rejection, but with the knowledge that this was the last place she might still let herself feel safe. When he reached the narrow archway of dead roses, he saw her, Cecily stood at the far edge of the garden, her figure still and small against the tangle of bare vines and skeletal branches. She wore her cloak, but the hood was down, revealing her dark hair bound in a loose plait. The hem of her gown brushed the snow, and her hands were clasped in front of her like someone in mourning. He took a step forward, then stopped. The garden was silent, save for the sound of melting snow dripping from the leaves. A robin flitted from one bare branch to another, then took flight. She turned. Her eyes, when they found him, held no trace of surprise, only sorrow. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "I had no choice," Cedric answered. His voice was rough with wind and emotion. "I had to find you." Her gaze returned to the ivy-strewn trellis behind her. "You've found me, then. Say what you came to say and let it be done." He stepped into the clearing, snow crunching beneath his boots. "I came to tell you the truth, not the version twisted by court gossip, not the version I kept hidden behind a lie." "You mean the blindness?" she asked bitterly. "Or the way you let me believe I mattered when I was just a convenience?" Cedric flinched. "No, never that." Cecily shook her head, her voice breaking. "I was your maid. I knew my place. I accepted it. But then you gave me words. You listened to my poems. You let me see the man behind the title. And Her voice cracked and she turned away. "I let myself believe it meant something." "It did. Then why did you never say it? Why wait until the world saw me as a scandal?" He took another step forward, his tone raw. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what? That they would laugh at you? That the mighty Duke of Ashworth had feelings for a bookseller's daughter with soil under her nails?" "No," he said quietly. "Afraid you would never forgive me." She turned back to him then, and her face, so often composed, was streaked with tears. "I loved my late wife," he said, "but she did not love me. And when she betrayed me, I was left hollow. I thought if I buried myself in darkness, I could control what I saw, and what I refused to feel." He stepped closer. "But you, Cecily, you were light in the middle of that darkness. Not because you served me, but because you never once asked anything in return. You gave kindness with no price. You saw a man, not a duke, and that terrified me more than any court gossip ever could." Her lips parted, but she said nothing. "I don't want a duchess in gold," he said, removing something from his cloak pocket. It was a ring, simple, made of ivy and dried rosemary, twisted carefully into a circle, still holding the scent of winter earth. "I want you, Cecily Harland, with ink on your fingers and stubborn roots under your nails. I want the woman who taught me to see with my heart instead of my eyes." She stared at the ring as if it might vanish. "That's not a gift a maid is meant to receive." He moved toward her. "I am not asking you as a duke. I'm asking you as a man who was blind in the ways that mattered most. I'm asking you not to forgive the lie, but to believe the truth." Silence fell again. Cecily looked down at the ring. Her breath caught as she reached for it, tentative, trembling, and touched the woven ivy with her fingertips. It was imperfect, assembled by hands unskilled in craft but rich in feeling, and it was hers. When she looked up again, Cedric had dropped to one knee. "I don't want a court ceremony. I don't want a dowry. I want a promise, yours." Her voice, when it finally came, was soft and sure. "You don't need to kneel, Cedric." "I do," he said, "because it's not a favor I ask. It's a vow." She reached out slowly, placing her hand over his. "I am not your reward," she said, "and I will not be your redemption." "I know," he whispered. "But I am yours," she finished, voice trembling, "and I have been long before you ever saw me." He rose to his feet, his eyes never leaving hers. No one applauded. No servants peeked from behind hedges. No noble voices intruded. Only the wind stirred the ivy, and the sky above softened to morning blue. When Cedric leaned forward, it was not with urgency nor desire, it was with reverence. Their foreheads touched first, breath mingling in the chill. Then, finally, A kiss, not of possession, not of passion, but of recognition. A kiss that whispered, "You were there all along." And beneath their feet, in the hidden garden of winter, tiny green shoots pushed through the snow, fragile, defiant, alive. The winds of late March carried with them the scent of thawed earth and the faint promise of spring. Ashworth Hall, long cloaked in grief and scandal, now stood at the brink of something unheard of in its storied history. Not a new alliance between noble houses, not a merger of fortunes or the sealing of dynastic power, but a union born of quiet defiance, of truth, of love that had bloomed where no one had thought to look. The grand hall had grown still that morning, filled with the sort of hush that falls not from reverence, but from disbelief. He is truly going to marry her. Whispers floated through corridors like smoke, curling around velvet draperies and polished columns. The Duke had sent no formal invitations to the court, no gilded notices or orchestral summons. There would be no grand parade, no evening ball, only a simple ceremony held in the old stone chapel on the edge of the estate, where ivy crept up the walls and light streamed through coloured glass onto cold pews. And yet, the gallery filled. Some came out of loyalty, others out of morbid curiosity. But most came to witness what many believed impossible, that a man of rank could strip himself of pride, and a woman of no title could rise without arrogance. That scandal could become sanctity, and that love, when pure, could silence even the cruelest tongue. Cecily Harland stood before the small mirror in her chamber, one hand pressed gently to her chest. She wore no silk. Her gown was of soft grey wool, unadorned except for a row of delicate stitching along the hem, a gesture from Mrs. Lyle, the head seamstress, who had once scolded her for dreaming above her station, and now wept openly as she fastened the last hook. Her hair was not adorned with pearls, but pulled back in a modest braid, with a single sprig of rosemary tucked behind her ear. A scent of lavender clung faintly to her skin, mingling with the memory of winter. She looked at her reflection, not with awe, nor with fear, but with peace. The door creaked, and Eliza, a younger maid who had once spilled ink over Cecily's apron and cried for an hour, stepped into the room holding a small parcel tied with blue ribbon. "It's from His Grace," she whispered, cheeks flushed. "Said you should open it alone." Cecily untied the ribbon carefully. Inside was a letter, written in Cedric's hand, and a small handkerchief embroidered with ivy leaves and violets. The note read, "For the woman who taught me to see. I once believed titles gave us meaning, but today I know it is the name we choose for each other that matters most. Today, I choose yours, and I offer you mine, not as a crown, but as a vow." She held the handkerchief to her heart and closed her eyes. In the chapel, Cedric stood waiting, his coat of deep charcoal trimmed simply, his cravat tied without excess. He wore no sash, no insignia. His signet ring rested on the altar beside two candles, unlit. His eyes scanned the doorway as the bell rang once, low and solemn. Then she appeared. She did not glide, she walked. Step by step, down the stone aisle, her hand lightly brushing the worn pews where once she had knelt to pray for strength in silence. The chapel was not silent now. It held breath. It held astonishment. It held reverence. The Queen's letter had arrived just an hour before, its seal of crimson wax still intact, when the footman brought it into the drawing room. Cedric had read it aloud to the steward, to the staff, to the few nobles gathered in stiff protest. Her Majesty grants her blessing upon the union of Cedric Ashworth, Duke of Westmere, and Cecily Harland, daughter of the late Elias Harland, bookseller of York. Her Majesty acknowledges the bride's acts of quiet heroism during the plague, her defense of fellow servants during times of peril, and her unwavering truth in the face of deception. Let none contest the union. It was not approval by bloodline, it was approval by merit. And now, as Cecily reached the front of the chapel, Cedric took her hand, not with ownership, but with awe. "You came," he whispered. "I nearly didn't," she answered, voice trembling. "But then I remembered the garden." A pause. "And the ring," she added softly, eyes shining. "No gold could ever weigh as much as ivy." They faced the priest, who looked at them not as symbols of rebellion, but as two souls who had found each other against every tradition. "Do you, Cedric John Ashworth, take this woman?" "I do," Cedric said before the priest could finish. His voice carried not through volume, but through the conviction in his tone. "And do you, Cecily Harland, take this man?" "I do," she said, more softly still, though somehow it echoed louder than all else. When the kiss was sealed, it was gentle, not a proclamation, not a conquest, but the kind of kiss that comes after surviving something that was meant to break you. As they turned to face the small gathering, there was a beat of silence. Then, from the servants' benches, a sudden cheer. It began with Eliza, then George, the gardener, then Mrs. Lyle and the entire kitchen staff, who rose to their feet with tears and applause. And from the gallery above, the slow, stunned clap of a nobleman who had once sworn allegiance to Cedric's father. Then another, then another. Not all clapped. Some turned away, leaving in silence, their shoes echoing over marble. But others remained. And in that chapel built of stone and stained glass, the weight of centuries began to shift. Not crumble, but bend. Later, they walked together through the garden. Not the hidden one, but the main grounds, where the crocuses had begun to pierce the thawed earth, and the first blooms of primrose had unfurled beneath the hedges. Cedric bent down, brushing snow from a bench beside the fountain. Cecily joined him. They sat in silence for a long time. At last, she spoke. "I don't know how to be a duchess." Cedric smiled. "Good. I don't know how to be a husband. We'll learn both, slowly, together." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he brought her hand to his lips. Somewhere behind them, the chapel bell rang again. Not in warning, not in mourning, but in beginning. And in the winter garden, unseen but not forgotten, a single vine of ivy crept upward through the lattice, toward the sun. The spring of the year 1609 arrived with gentler winds than most. The crocuses bloomed early that season, carpeting the gardens of Ashworth Hall in hues of violet and gold. And though time had etched faint lines at the corners of her eyes, Cecily Ashworth still knelt in the soil every morning, her fingers calloused but graceful, coaxing life from earth with the same quiet reverence she once gave to books and teacups. The winter garden had never been more vibrant. Twisted ivy now framed the archway where Cedric had once knelt before her. Violets, snowdrops, and lilies had taken root in the beds she tended by moonlight so long ago. The path was now lined with flat stones carved with words, poems she had written and had never intended to share. Cedric had collected each one, committing them to stone as if afraid time might steal her voice away. Cecily smiled as she traced the newest inscription. "We are not what they named us, but what we dared to become." Behind her, childish laughter echoed through the garden. Two boys, identical in appearance but impossibly different in temperament, raced between the flower beds. Edmund, named after the courtier who had once believed in her, led with arms stretched wide like wings. Elias, quieter but no less daring, followed with a half-smile and a pebble clutched in his fist. Cedric stood by the garden gate, older now, his once dark hair touched by silver. But the gravity in his eyes had softened, the old pain, the loss, the betrayal. Time had not erased them, but love had reframed them. He had found in Cecily not a replacement for what was lost, but a rebirth of something he had never known, a home. "Your sons are planning to ambush the cook again," he said, amusement curling at the edge of his mouth. Cecily rose from her knees and dusted off her apron. "Let them. Margaret still owes them for the burnt pudding. They're 6. She's had 8 years to improve," Cecily teased. Cedric stepped closer, brushing a smudge of earth from her cheek with the back of his hand. Even after all this time, her breath caught at his touch. From the terrace above, applause and music drifted into the air. Guests had arrived from court, many of them former skeptics, now close allies. Lady Beresford, once cold and dismissive, had become godmother to their youngest. The Queen herself had sent a silk-bound book of Cecily's poetry to be read aloud at the annual spring gathering, where noblewomen now whispered with curiosity about how to cultivate sweet alyssum and ivy blooms of their own. Ashworth Hall had become a quiet symbol of change. Not revolution, no, it was too elegant for that, but a subtle reordering, a widening of the world, petal by petal. Not all had fared as well. Lady Aurelia Fenwick, once destined to be Duchess, now lived in exile in the French countryside. Her attempted elopement with Lord Wensley had ended in public disgrace, and his subsequent arrest for forgery left her with little more than a tarnished dowry and bitter letters no one read. Her name had become a cautionary whisper, a shadow at the edge of every ballroom. Cecily had never spoken ill of her. Some wounds healed in silence. As the boys tumbled toward them, Cedric caught one beneath each arm, lifting them with theatrical groans. "You grow heavier every day," he said. "We grow braver," Edmund corrected, puffing out his chest. Cecily laughed, but there were tears in her eyes, because sometimes love didn't declare itself with banquets or royal seals. Sometimes it lingered in the fingerprints on a garden gate, in poetry carved into stone, in boys with ivy-green eyes and wild imaginations, and in the man who had once pretended to be blind, only to discover that the truest vision is found not with the eyes, but with the soul. That night, as the candles burned low and the estate hushed once more, Cedric and Cecily stood together in the winter garden. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" he asked. "No," she whispered, "because now I know joy has its own kind of silence." He kissed her temple, and they stood without words, surrounded by the scent of blooming violets and the echo of laughter in the breeze. And beneath their feet, the ivy grew. In a world that often measures worth by titles, birthright and fortune, Cecily's journey reminds us that true nobility lives not in bloodlines, but in compassion, resilience, and quiet courage. Through whispered poetry and simple acts of kindness, she changed a man who had forgotten how to hope, and in doing so, rewrote her destiny. This story is for everyone who has ever been overlooked and still chose to love. For those who have been told they are not enough and still stood tall. And for those who have waited years, maybe a lifetime, for someone to truly see them. If you made it to the end of this story, we'd love to know. Type the word Ivy in the comments. It may seem small, but it lets us know that you walked every step with Cecily and Cedric, and it helps our little storytelling community grow stronger together. If this tale stirred your heart and you wish to support the team who brings these emotional journeys to life, consider sending a super thanks on YouTube with any amount you feel inspired to give. Your support helps us continue weaving these historical romances that celebrate love, strength, and second chances. And if now isn't the moment to give, no worries at all. You can still help by sharing this story with a friend, a sister, a mother, or anyone who believes in the power of love blooming in unexpected places. And don't forget, we've left more romantic tales for you in the cards above, each one filled with longing glances, stolen kisses, and hearts that find their way home. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling this story with us. And until the next one, let love lead.